We are live. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Balance and Empathy. I'm here today with Ashok from Canada. Ashok is the founder of the Empathy Clinic. Welcome, Ashok. We've talked to you a couple of times already, and I'm very pleased that you're here again today. Today, the topic is kindness and compassion, and I think this is something we can all globally relate to, especially in these difficult times. We all need kindness and compassion. So that's the topic we're going to discuss today. Everyone who is watching, please tell us where are you watching from, which country, because we are always very curious where you are based. So to top off with the topic, compassion. What is compassion? What do you think?
Well, I think, first of all, we've got to talk about empathy before we talk about compassion and kindness. So empathy is the capacity to experience or sense somebody's feelings or thoughts from their point of view. Once we have a sense of what someone may need or wish to have happen, then we can think about how to be compassionate. And then once we've thought about being compassionate, we can do something which is kindness. And so compassion, in my understanding, is the idea of wishing to do something helpful or kind to somebody else, and then what you do about it. That can be applicable in our personal relationships, in the workplace, and in the community as well.
That's very well said. That's very well said. Yes, of course, empathy comes first to be able to compassion. And I think for me, when I talk from my own personal experience, when you show compassion, it also means staying away from judgments. Because I always think you cannot compare or judge anyone's situation until you stand in their shoes, right? Otherwise, you just don't understand. You can show compassion, obviously, but yeah, stay away from judgment. And just to give a little example, so I'm a mom of 6 kids, and people often say to me, "Oh, how do you do it? That must be so busy." Sometimes people who have less children than I do complain, complain, that's a big word, but it's so busy. I have 2 children, I have this and this and this. And then I think, I might think, well, I have more children than you, so you must not have been so busy because I'm much busier than you. But I never do that because you just never know what that person is going through, what he or she may be carrying with them, which they have to take care of. You never can judge anyone. I think compassion is also go in hand with staying away from that judgment of people, and really enabling them to talk about their story, and be heard.
Well, I think when we're talking about judgment,
What do you think about judgment?
judgment can go a few ways. We can get judgment correct, if we're lucky, but it's always best to ask the question, how are you experiencing that? So if you were speaking to a mom who has 1 or 2 children and she is saying, it is so difficult, how do you do it, Tisha, with 6 children? You may say, well, I find it this way, but how do you find it? And once you start asking the question, how, then you're adding to your understanding of the other person's experience. And we never know how someone's experiencing something until they ask, because for most of us, we want to appear to be doing well. We want to appear to be fine. And we can't always do that. And so there's a natural tendency when people say, how are you doing? For us to say, I'm fine, like I'm good. But then if you see them struggling, they might be struggling with their physical health, with their emotional health, then we can say, how is it for you? And that's when we can get past that judgmental thought.
Absolutely, that's very well said. And I think, yeah, being vulnerable. If you aren't afraid to be vulnerable to other person also might open up more to you, because of course when you scroll through social media, everybody is doing fantastic. Look at my beautiful home, my fantastic car, look at my amazing family, I'm doing fantastic. Obviously, that can never be the case. Nobody is ever saying that they're doing fantastic. We all have something that's part of life. So I think being vulnerable, both ways I think it goes, are able to let their guard down and tell their story, and able to show more compassion to each other.
Well, I think vulnerability is key in being able to express and show how you're feeling. Somebody just asked us then about survival with compassion. And sometimes we only have so much compassion. It's not an unlimited supply. There is even something called compassion fatigue. And this is when we run out of compassion and we start to feel a little numb and maybe even a little disinterested in being more compassionate than the capacity that we have. It doesn't mean that we've suddenly become not a compassionate person. It means that just like our bank account, sometimes we're run out and we have to take a break and look after ourselves, maybe look after our family, and then go back to being compassionate later on. We see this all the time with being charitable. We should be charitable, absolutely, but we can only be so charitable. We also have to have a capacity to look for ourselves. And the thing that you were talking about is vulnerability. When we see people who are struggling, we see them as being vulnerable. And there's a natural tendency to be uncomfortable when somebody else is vulnerable. But there's also a natural intensity to hide our vulnerability. So this is why it gets complicated. Because when we're compassionate, we want to appear that we can handle our compassion without getting fatigued. But at the same time, we hope our compassion has a positive influence and effect on the person that we're being compassionate towards.
So, and just comparing the talk a minute ago about your running empty, I think like when your compassion account is running empty, of course it can be filled up again, but then at the same time, I think your own like bucket is full at the moment. So there is a disbalance, right, in the compassion ability, and then your own experiences and your own bucket of emotions that you need to take care of. So I think showing compassion, self-compassion is also very, very important, because if you do not take care of yourself sufficiently, how are you able to, show compassion to others? There needs to be a right balance.
Well, there has to be the right balance, and that's why our show is Balance and Empathy, because I think balance is the key to looking after. Looking after self always has to happen, even when you're looking after other people. I'm a doctor, and being a healthcare worker means that you have to look after yourself. We're not just helping others; we're a role model of health and wellness, physical health and mental and emotional wealth. And if you're not careful to look after your compassion bucket, as you say, and you let that run dry, then you're not going to be as compassionate. But interestingly, you're not going to be as helpful in the way that you thought you were to the person you're trying to help. So it's key to balance your self-care with the care of others. And people can tell when you've run out of compassion. Your body language changes, your facial language changes, the words you use. You said?
Right. Yeah, no, I said, how can you tell? So your body language and maybe also like a disinterest.
Yes, it can be. It can look like
when there is this sorry, there's a little bit lagging, I think, because of the connection. So when there is a disbalance, in your professional opinion, how can people balance themselves again? Compassion-wise.
The best way to balance yourself compassion-wise is to know what your dials are saying. So just like we have a gas gauge in a car, You can look at it and it says, you've got a little bit of gas or more gas. You have to be aware of how much gas you have. So if you wake up in the morning and you're smiling and you have energy and you feel motivated, that's a good day. That's a good tank of gas. But if you're waking up and you're feeling, oh, I just don't want to get up, I'm tired, I have no energy, I'm feeling sore, that you may not be the most compassionate in that way. So you have to pay attention to yourself. That doesn't mean that you don't pay attention to things around you as well, but it means that you're part of that program. And that means, how you well rested, how's your mood, how's your energy levels, and do you feel like being compassionate? And you can tell if you start paying attention to this that you're in the mood to be compassionate. Compassion also can make you feel good about yourself. To be kind and compassionate is a key human feature. So when we are compassionate, we often feel good about ourselves. So that can actually increase your energy to be compassionate. But if you're run out personally on yourself, that's when you need to take charge of that. You need to take inventory and you need to do what you need to do, which might be just to disconnect, see your friends, hang out, take a walk, do some exercise, watch a movie, read a book, etc. Those things.
Right. Yeah, I think that's very well said. You need to take care of yourself first, especially on those days where you really feel your tank of compassion isn't as full as it can be, right? But at the same time, it means maybe saying no to others. And I think a lot of people struggle saying no. And also, when you say no to someone, other people might experience that as you're not that compassionate. But at the same time, when you're really taking care of yourself and you just to get that kind of compassion, it's necessary to say no. And it's not that you're not compassionate, but you're compassionate to yourself right now, and able to be compassionate to others again the next day. But it's really, people can maybe struggle dealing with the judgment of others. When you say no, you're not that compassionate, you're not that all of a sudden.
Well, I think that's a fantastic point, Tisha. That's a fantastic point, and I think the word you're hovering around is the word boundaries, and that when we have boundaries, we can say no comfortably, and hopefully the people that we're saying no to will respect that boundary. My rule is that if you say most of the time, you can say no some of the time, as long as it's appropriate, especially with kindness and compassion. If you say no all the time, well, maybe you're not a very compassionate person. But if you say yes a lot, but then finally someone says, can you still be compassionate? It's okay to say no. And you don't have to say why, but you can say, regretfully, I would like to help you right now, but I'm not in the space or the position to, but I'll get back to you when I can. And most people will understand that. So that's a boundary around your own compassion so that you're aware of what you can give realistically, but also lets the other person know that you're respecting self-compassion. Because everyone needs to learn how to be self-compassionate as well, because as we've already spoken, that's a balance thing too.
Absolutely. It comes right back to that balance point again. You need to be in balance. Not always yes, not always no, but in the right balance. But when people see you as someone who is always available to them, some people just do struggle saying no, and then they come to you for help. And they say, well, Ashok, I'm really struggling. I want to set more boundaries to people, but I'm afraid of their reaction. So how do you switch from that point to being in more balance and people respecting your boundaries? Because I think when you become like another person, you're starting to set those boundaries as you didn't before, people are going to react because suddenly you're not that person they can turn to all the time when they want.
So I think it's key as well that when you're practicing boundaries, that you're aware that there are situations that may be good for you, there's situations that may not be so good for you. And we have to watch out when people are requesting us to do things, that is essentially is a good thing for them, but hopefully it's a good thing for us as well. Not always, because compassion isn't always convenient, but the outcome will be good, because we have to watch out for someone always asking us to the point where we're actually feeling a bit exploited. And if we start to feel exploited, we're not being compassionate anymore. We're being resentfully helpful. And if you help with resentment, the effect isn't going to be the same than if you help with compassion. So I think sometimes it's much better to say to somebody, regretfully, I can't do that. So no, I can't try. I can't do that. I'm sorry. And move on, rather than try to do something, but really you're feeling resentment about it. And that's going to come out in the effort that you give, I think.
Oh, thank you so much, Ashok. We have a question from Danica Gunter. Danica, thank you for watching. She says, compassion is being sensitive to others, pain and suffering, and going out of your way to help them. No judgment, just acceptance, empathy, and love. I think that's one said, but again, also have compassion for yourself and your own boundaries. And we'll give her to Sabi. Thank you for watching. He says, Danica agrees. And Danica is also saying giving and receiving is always the best balance.
I agree with that. I think actually a word I like to use a lot when I'm talking about empathy and balance is reciprocity, which means there's a give and take. And the best relationships, if we look at the three types of relationships that we have symbiotic relationships, we have parasitic relationships, and we have synergistic relationships. And synergy is where the advantage for both to be together is much bigger than simply if they're sharing just the same space or if one is taking from the other, like a parasite. So I think a synergistic relationship is where two people or even a group of people are benefiting beyond because of the reciprocity that they have with each other. And that's kindness, that's compassion, that's thoughtfulness, and that starts with empathy. And when that can happen, the individuals or the group are much better off because they're being compassionate and kind to each other as a general state of being. And being kind and compassionate to each other as a general state of being creates much more, we talked about this last time, civility and comfort and safety when you're in your relationships with each other.
That's well said. That's well said. Everyone is agreeing a lot with what Danica is saying. So thank you so much, Danica, for your contribution. I love it. People are loving the top. So just a question to the audience. If you have a question, please put it in the chat so I can show your question live here. We can just go into that right now. People are all over the world, so this is just wonderful. And Abdullah is saying a balance of not being the yes submissive person by nor the no aggressive would be an assertive compassionate. Great topic. Thank you so much.
Well, I think I just want to talk about that. I think it's important to differentiate being aggressive from being assertive. So when you're aggressive, you're frightening or putting down or hurting the other person. When you're assertive, you're still drawing a boundary, but you're not hurting the other person. You're actually helping the other person. And it's the same way, Tisha, as raising children. You don't want to be aggressive with your children, but at times you might need to be assertive. Like, no, we're not having candy just before supper. And so being assertive, I think, is very important when we're looking after ourselves and how to look after others. And if assertion is done with a calm mind, a calm mood, and calm words, then I think that is a much better way than using aggression. Because the aggression, as I talked about earlier, can come from that resentful helpfulness that sometimes happens when people say yes to something and they're really not feeling that, so they'll do it out of resentment, and that causes aggression, and that's going to come out in the kind act that they're doing.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. And like when you show aggression to other people, usually they take the wall up then afterwards, right? Because when you're aggressive towards a person, how likely is it that person is going to come back to you? Child, coworker, maybe a management worker relationship. How big is the chance that person will come back to you to ask help when they actually need it? I think very slightly. So I think aggression, agree 100%, it's never the way. We have a question from Mamadu. Thank you for watching. How can we know the best relationship today because so many people are not reliable? Well, I think trial and error is one way of knowing. Yeah, sure. When you meet people who are not reliable, that can hurt you, and that can also shut you off from other people because you don't trust other people anymore because of your bad experience. But always know that not all people are like that, and there are many wonderful people out there in the world who you can connect with and who you can build a relationship with, which can be a very synergetic relationship. So maybe Asha will answer to this. When you have experienced a lot of unreliable people, how do you get over that in the sense of how do you still connect to people open-minded and not let these past experiences stand in the way?
Well, I think this is a really important thing to mention when we're talking about compassion, because we're not all the same person. We're all different people. And when we're expecting something from somebody, they may do it in a different way. And sometimes we have to respect the way that somebody else is doing something. Now, I'm a very timely person. And so if someone says, I'll meet you at a certain time, I try to make that time. But sometimes I can't. Sometimes something happens and I either I messed up or just life got in the way. And I'm hoping that person won't judge me too harshly, and there will be some forgiveness. Now, if I'm always that way, if I'm always unreliable, then that can be a personality trait of that person, and you might need to address it with that person in an assertive way, not in an aggressive way. One of my techniques with people, and I'm not saying it's my work, but maybe more in my personal life, is if I'm doing a lot for somebody, I will ask them to do something for me. And if they just refuse to do it, or they don't do it, or they for some reason it doesn't happen, it will tell me that I cannot rely on that person as much as I probably thought I should. So then the purpose of the relationship might be more, instead of expecting things from them, than just sharing events or moments with them, rather than saying, well, they're going to do something for me. So not all people are put together the same way. And it's a real challenge sometimes to find those comfortable places with people where you can still enjoy the relationship, but not be disappointed by them too frequently.
I think that's a very interesting approach, and I think that's very good advice for Valde. So thank you, Ashok. So basically, when you experience, it's just like really knowing, is it a personality trait or is it just maybe life happening? Sometimes it happens. I have the same thing. And then when you suspect it is a personality trait, then just ask for something back. So basically, you're like testing that person, right?
Yes, you're testing them.
Yeah, testing if the relationship is a synergetic one or not.
If you're going to get reciprocity and synergy. Exactly right, Tisha. Exactly. It's about balance again, right? To see if there's going to be balance in that relationship.
Absolutely. Dr. Shazab Zeb, thank you for watching. He is saying this assertiveness needs to be mastered well enough as mostly perception may show this assertiveness as aggression. And that starts me thinking, could this also be culturally influenced? When you're being assertive, I know it can it be that in some cultures it's much normal than in other cultures? So, for instance, when I look at the Netherlands here, especially the area where I live, people are quite straightforward. They say what they think. And a lot of people about the Dutch, one likes it. So when you're in a working relationship, it can be confronting. They just say to you, I don't like it. I want it like this and this. And then you know where you stand, At the other hand, our country below, it's Belgium. People over there are much more introverts, much more polite, and they say things very differently. That's like 30 minutes place, right? So I always find that so interesting how people are so differently. So being assertive in some cultures might come across as being rude, maybe.
Well, when I go to India, everyone is very clear about how they think and feel. When I go to Thailand, people are very careful to say anything critical whatsoever. And in Canada, people just apologize all the time, even if they've done nothing. They say, I'm sorry for almost everything. So your cultural observations are very, very correct. Our culture has a lot to do with what everybody else is doing in that culture. But I always say, when I'm about to say something that might be difficult for that person to hear, I don't mean this to sound aggressive. I don't mean this to sound critical. I don't intend for this to be hurtful for you. And if it is, I'm apologizing in advance and I'll say it. And that way I set up the intent of what I'm going to say prior to what I say. And it works about 80 to 90% of the time.
Right. So you're really taking away all the elements that might maybe influence it culturally, and you just make it person to person.
That's right.
I think that's I think that's just a wonderful approach, because in the end we are all people wherever you are born, wherever you live, right? It really doesn't matter. We're all individuals with our own experiences, our own culture. And I said it the last show too, like the diversity, I just love that. I find it so interesting, educational, and I just love learning about other cultures. We have a comment coming in from Moses Collins. Thank you for watching, Moses. He says, oh, I can relate to this one. He says, our kids do sometimes not listen to what we say. He says sometimes, right? Okay. We get disappointed. We say something in soft voice first, then shout at them. And if they still do not listen, we start beating them. Okay, let's talk about that. Is it good to do so? Slowly these things become. Would you like to answer that?
I think, in our country, in Canada, there's laws against how you treat children. And as a physician, I have to respond if I think that a child is feeling unnecessarily unsafe in the home environment. I think sometimes when we are parenting our children, we may need to appear to be harsh and firm. You certainly can restrain a child. For example, if a child is running into the street, you can hold them very vigorously and pull them back to safety. But we really don't live in a culture here in Canada where we can strike children out of aggression. We may need to use some physicality. Like I said, holding is completely safe. But I think generally what the child remembers when they get older is resentment for how they were treated. If there's too much negativity, especially verbal volume, especially harsh words, and physicality, that's what children remember when they get older. And I think that affects their confidence and their self-esteem and their sense of self. So even if we're very, very mad at our child, I still say that we need to find the best way possible to safely communicate our feelings to them without making them feel like they're losing their sense of value. And the test of this is if you saw somebody else treating your child that way, Would that be okay for you? So we sometimes feel a bit more comfortable being assertive with our children, but if you saw someone else talking to your child, or heaven forbid hitting your child, would you say, oh, thanks, that I was planning to do that myself? Or would you say, don't you ever treat my child that way? Because I think when we see someone else doing it, it's, oh my gosh, I don't want my child to have to go through that. But if you're doing it, then in fact you are putting your child through that. So I think that's often a good test to see if a behavior towards your child is acceptable. And I know we all lose our tempers at times, but it's still on us to control that as best as we can.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think we also serve, I have a couple of things I want to say about that. We always serve as a role model to our children. Your children will become, hopefully, parents later themselves. And often what we are taught as a child, we will then carry on and take with us in our adulthood. And then when we have children of our own, we'll treat the children in, well, maybe not 100% the same way, but lots of it we take with us, right? So keep in mind, you want to be a very good role model for your child. And yes, about losing your temper, sure, children can really test your patience and what they do. They also need to learn boundaries. And I think when something is happening, your child is behaving in a certain way, always separate the person from the behavior. Always do that, So I'm saying to my child, I love you so much, but I do not like your behavior right now. If something is going on, but I will always love you. Just this and this, don't do that anymore, because so that's something that I do. And when they still continue, I think you must make sure that you're not telling them 10 times to not continue. Just make that or then put in a consequence. For instance, like kids now have an iPad or a phone now they really love, obviously. Take away that phone if they don't listen. For my kids, it works anyway, so they immediately start listening then, or something else, game, or if they really like to play outside, okay, you cannot play outside for half an hour. You go to your room, you think about your behavior. That's something that I do from the person, not let it go on too long, and always what I think, but I'd love your opinion too, Ashok, is that your voice, the way you talk to your child, the way you make them feel, even when things in situations that aren't that pleasant, you can still choose your behavior in a certain way. And your voice to your child, it often becomes their inner voice, the voice that they hear inside their head, as the way that you talk to them. So keep in mind, what do you want them to hear inside their head? Do you want that to be a voice of support, a voice of confidence, a voice that helps them becoming that great adult that they can be? Or do you want it to become a voice of aggression, shouting, disappointment? You don't want that. I think I should talk.
So let's use an example of having to take your child to get a vaccine, because that's going to happen all over the world right now. And I think that when we have a child who has to get a vaccine, there's going to be, most kids are going to be okay with it. There's also going to be some children who are frightened of it and they're scared. And I think that compassion, which is really what we're talking about today, compassion can help you help that child get that unpleasant needle. But you'll be supportive, you'll be loving with them. Even if they're being very upset, you're trying to calm them down. You might need to be a little assertive and say, we have to do this. They are going to have something unpleasant. But if you do that in a compassionate way, they won't remember the needle as much as they remember the way that you handled them when they were being difficult. And if you do that with love and kindness and compassion, and that doesn't mean you're not being firm, it means that you're doing it compassionately, which means you're taking into account their fear, their pain, their anxiety, and you're treating it non-judgmentally, so that the memory of that is, how did your needle go? It wasn't so bad. In fact, I didn't even feel it that much because mommy or daddy was compassionate with me. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And I have a little example for that. Like my daughter had to go to have a COVID test done a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, I think. She was, she's, and I did what you said, and then help because she was still scared, but we had to do it, right? Because then otherwise the school won't let her come back and so on, right? So, then they offer the children who do the test, they offer the children a little present afterwards, or they give children a diploma of bravery, right? So that's this here in the Netherlands, that's the stuff they do, and I'm sure in Canada they do stuff like that too for children. So I think those things also help, just be brave. I have to do this. Be brave, and if you're really brave, you're gonna get a little present afterwards, or you're gonna get a diploma. Look how brave you were, right? And I think those things just really help for children.
It does. And I think it lets them know that even if they're scared, they're safe. Even if they're frightened, there's someone who is not frightened or as frightened. Because sometimes as a parent, we have to take our kids to things that frighten us too. And so we're both frightened. So sometimes it's okay to tell your child, I'm scared too, but I'm going to be here with you. And we're going to go through this together. We're going to stay as calm as we can. I'm going to love you. And you do that compassionately, and that changes the experience and makes it, that's a synergy of compassion, I think.
Beautifully said, Ashok, beautifully said. And Danica is saying we need to speak from the children's level. Children are experiencing life. We are guiding them. How to accept right from wrong. That's what we said. So tone, rate, and volume are really things you need to take into account as a parent, but also a caretaker or as a teacher, right? Because children see many adults in their life, and whether you are their parent or you are like their teacher or their neighbor, for that matter, you always take these into account. Never you one child to. You were naughty too, right? You tested your parents' patience too. Remember that, right? And then help your children to become the best adults they can be. So we have a couple of minutes left, and I want to ask you, Asher, what about the people? Because we deal with people all the time, right? In work in your neighborhood, at home, in relationships. See a lot of people in your job too. So when you meet people, encounter people that do not show kindness and compassion, maybe not a bit, you can then respond maybe with animosity to or set boundaries or think, well, this is not synergetic to me, so I'll just turn away. But maybe that person had some bad experiences. Maybe their bucket is full. Maybe that person also needs help. How can you make a difference in that person's life so to be able to open that door for that person to kindness and compassion?
Well, I think sometimes we need to give people a chance. So I have an interesting story about that. I have someone I've known for many, many years, and I would and it's a fellow doctor, and we've been friends. We went to med school together for years, and I'm a hugger. I like to hug people that I'm close to in my life. So I tried to hug him one day, and he just wouldn't have anything of it. It took me 5 years of trying to get him to hug me back. And now when we talk, we say that we love each other and our wives are best friends. But it took me 5 years to get him to accept my compassionate hugs to him. And now he insists on me hug all the time. So sometimes you don't push it on somebody, but you invite it and say, I'm here and I'm ready when you're ready because I'm going to be here. And sometimes it takes a long time. It doesn't always work, but when it does work, it's beautiful.
Wow, that's a great story. Thank you, Ashok, for that. Yes, so I think that be by example, right? So if another person does not show kindness and compassion, it can be like up to you to show that person, that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to show kindness and compassion. And I think that's a wonderful story. Thank you so much, Ashok. So we're running out of time for today. I just want to say I really loved discussing this. So thank you for your, your conversation and sharing your experiences and advice. For everyone who is watching, please follow Akshak on LinkedIn. Work he is just fantastic at the Empathy Clinic, and I think in the next show I would really like to talk about that too. What kind of work do you do? How do you help people? And tell us about the Empathy Clinic and the wonderful work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Tisha. We'll do that next time.
Absolutely. So thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you again in another 2 weeks with another beautiful show about balance and empathy. See you then.
Bye, everyone.